Welcome back, my friends, to the Tips for the Trades podcast, where we explore practical strategies to help service companies like yours thrive in today's competitive market. I'm your host, Jeremy Lowe, and today I'm excited to dive deeper into a topic that can have a big impact on your hiring process, using personality assessment, specifically the DISC profile. That's D-I-S-C. Now, if you're not familiar, DISC profiles are a hiring and management assessment tool that helps people understand themselves and others by measuring a person's four main behavioral styles: their dominance, influence, steadiness, and compliance traits, which also help us gain insight into their working style. This is part 2 of our two-part series, where in the first part, we introduced the concept of a DISC personality assessment. And now, in part 2, we're going to explore how this report is interpreted and used for hiring and management purposes. So today we're going to get started, and we're going to dig in more to the psychology of using a DISC assessment by talking with Chris Michel. Chris brings over 20 years of his experience in management and sales in the HVAC industry to ServiceNation, where he now serves as the Director of Training, responsible for class development and all of the training done through ServiceNation. But what's great is Chris is also certified as a DISC instructor, and he's been working with these profiles for close to a decade. And I had the privilege of sitting in on one of the classes that Chris did recently to learn myself more about DISC, which is what got me started on the subject today. So welcome to the show, Chris. Glad to have you. And why don't we start off by you just telling us a little bit about yourself and about how you got interested in DISC.
Well, thanks, Jeremy. It's great to be here. I got interested in DISC when I first, it first came to me as an opportunity for kind of a self-assessment and to understand the psyche of people and how do we think and how do we work and how do we do things a little bit differently. And in learning and seeing those things, it started to become apparent how there are certain things that help us to understand how people tick, so to speak. And this is not a full-on, let's figure out how people move and think and do things. It's a tool in the handbag that we have in this case, human resources, right? So we can take this tool and understand a little bit better how people might react in a situation or how people might think given their traits and given how they normally react to things or do things in their lives. And so that's really where my interest had come into it. And the last year plus really just deep dived into it because of my role here at ServiceNation and being able to give this, again, as a tool to some of the contractors, because we all know that hiring is a 50-50 proposition at best.
Yeah, exactly.
And it just becomes this, gosh, I hope I got it right kind of thing. And you're sitting on pins and needles for 60 to 90 days trying to figure out, are they going to work? Are they not going to work? And this just gives you a little bit of an edge. And again, this is not a surefire, oh my gosh, we've got a winner. But this helps us to understand 5 or 10% better. Yeah, we've got the right person. And so now our hiring becomes 55 or 60%. And we still can, learn different avenues and different ways to hire people. So this is super helpful.
Yeah, so I believe that any competitive edge you can get in hiring, even if it's just a small one, is good because, like you said, hiring is a 50-50 thing. And so when you hire someone and you've got this 60 to 90 day probationary period they're on, it's kind of like the honeymoon phase. They're typically on their best behavior, and we really don't know long term what that person is going to do. So am I right in saying that the DISC is more looking at someone from their normal behavior, not their honeymoon phase?
Yes. So the bigger picture, and again, this is a snapshot of people, and the assessment that we use is not just DISC. It's not just the DIS and C, which so many people are used to, but those are the real visuals. That's what happens, if you will, on the surface. We dig a little bit deeper with these two other assessments, and one is the values assessment and the other is the attributes. And these are based off of two different scientific studies, psychological studies that were done through the years, and they help us to understand why people do the things that they do and then how they view themselves versus the world and vice versa. So how they view the world versus us and how they view themselves versus the world. And all of that comes into a pretty nice, easy to see, understand report. And that report just gives us some indicators as to how they might react or how they might do things or how they think about things, what's important to them, what's not important to them. Is it people? Is it leading? Is it return on investment? Is it the rules? Is it making sure that things look pretty and I've got a good work-life balance? All of these things help us to understand a little bit better how somebody may or may not react in a situation.
Yeah, so let's say I'm going to hire someone and I've got my candidates coming in and I go ahead and I have them take the DISC assessment. How can that assist me just in the hiring standpoint? Are there specific profiles we look for positions in the company? Maybe you can give us some illustrations.
Sure. So one of the other things that I've done is I had people ask me, hey, Chris, just what you said. Hey, Chris, I'm looking for a general manager. I'm looking for a sales person. I'm looking for a technician. I'm looking for an inside office person, office manager. I'm looking for this particular position. Can you help me to understand how DISC will tell me whether or not this person will work in that scenario? Again, when you look at it holistically, not just the DIS&C, but then you look at the values and you look at the attributes, you start to understand a little bit more how people will react. And so for a customer service rep, you need somebody who can be good on the phone, able to talk with people, able to handle high pressure situations, problem solve, right? All of those things. And you want them to be able to handle that stuff and get off the phone. Not to treat people badly, not to be more concerned about the results than they are people, but at the same time, they've got to be able to handle people, right? They have to have that empathy. And so, yes, there are things that we look for in these assessments. When you look at those things, you can kind of check mark and say, oh, that person does want to take care of people and they want the good work-life balance. And they're not out here just to be a rule follower because in a CSR position or a customer service position, it may not always be about the rules. You want them to understand the rules. You want them to follow the rules. But at the same time, you don't want them giving away the farm.
So the actual DISC is an acronym, and each of those characteristic traits are a little bit different. The dominance, the influence, etc. Could you just briefly hit on what each one of those are and how it affects the way a person would normally behave or act?
Sure. So again, this is the visible stuff. This is how we see people react. So if somebody is a high D, for instance, the word that's normally associated with this is they are a driver, they're decisive, they are sometimes they're demanding, and a high D personality, which is actually one of the smallest groups of people in the world today, are Ds, high Ds. What I mean by that is there's probably about 10% that are true high Ds. So they're drivers, they're people that are quick to make decisions, and people think, oh, that's a CEO. Not necessarily, but it could be. But they're very bottom line oriented. They show themselves by the trophies that are around them. They want you to see the car that they worked hard for, or the house that they worked hard for, or if they're into hunting, they've got the animal that they shot on their wall or caught, on their wall, or they've got a picture of the yacht that they have. They tend to have these trophies in their life that they want to show off. They want you to see how they've excelled and how they do well. The unfortunate thing about a high D is they don't understand why people don't think like them. And so they have a hard time with people, and they can come across as gruff or maybe short with people, but it's not. That has very little to do with it. They just don't necessarily tend to do well with people. The I, the influencer, is that person that they're the life of the party. They're the one making the party plans. They're the one inviting everybody. They're the one who is typically very easygoing and gets along with everybody. They're very creative in problem solving. They can get out there, be enthusiastic, right? They're a great encourager. These are the people that there's always a smile on their face. They're always trying to look at the bright side, if you will. The problem, the downside, if you will, for the high I is they don't care about the details, which is really interesting because when you're trying to set a party, they're like, hey, do I have food for 30? They're not thinking about all the other little details, but they want to make sure people are happy, right? They may have forgotten that the party starts at 6. And at 6:30, they're still scrambling to get things done because they're not as concerned with those type of things, those little details. The high S is considered steady. It's all about their pace. And so it's usually referred to as a steadiness. And these are the reliable, dependable people. They're the person sitting in the corner of the room, observing everybody, checking everybody out, making sure that everybody is taken care of. So they may be around taking care of folks, making sure that everything is going well. They're not generally going to speak up unless you ask them to. And so if you invite them into the conversation, they have an opinion. They've done the work, they've studied it, they understand their position on things. They are potentially resistant to change, though, and it may take a while for them to adjust to this change. They may even, not outwardly, but they may hold a grudge, and they may sit on it and stew on it, again, unless you invite them in. And you've got to be very mindful about the way that you do that and the way that you bring them into things. Finally, the high C is the conscientious one. These are the folks that are highly concerned about rules. They do like boundaries. They're very analytical. So you were asking earlier about positions. I want my accountant to be a high C, no question. If they don't have a high C, they shouldn't be working the books. They shouldn't, a bookkeeper or accountant or somebody in charge of the financials. No, I don't want that, because if they're not that person, they're not going to be able to do things the way that they need to be done. They tend to be rule followers. They tend to be the ones that bring the high D and the high I back into the fold. And they say, okay, guys, that's fine. We can do it that way, but don't forget, if we do it that way, we could end up in jail. So that's the high C. And again, you just got to be careful. You make sure that you set boundaries for these folks and action steps and who's going to be responsible for this or who's going to be responsible for that, because they need to have that information.
So when I took the class with you, Chris, one of the things that stood out in my mind is you emphasized that this profile assessment is not automatically a disqualification of an applicant, and it's not a guarantee of behavior either. Talk a little more to that.
Yeah, I think like everything, we have to understand that this is just a tool. And this is a snapshot of a person in the moment that they took the assessment. So if they were having a bad day, they may read one way. They may appear one way. Now, their DIS and C are pretty much going to stay the way that they would stay. But the values, the attributes, the way that they view themselves versus the world, and all of those things may come into play if they've had a really good day or a really bad day. And so what I share with folks when looking at the assessments, this is a piece of the pie that helps you to understand the whole pie. So I typically tell people, when you're hiring somebody or when you're looking for somebody to work in your company, you want to make sure that they fit your culture first. This assessment is going to be able to help you to understand the things behind why they believe what they believe. In other words, why do they fit into your culture, or why won't they fit into your culture? This is not a hard, fast rule, but too often I see people, they go, man, this person's a super high worker and they do really well and they're going to work super hard and they work late and get to work early and they do all these wonderful things. And you don't understand that maybe they're going through a divorce, and the reason they're at work early and late is because they don't want to be home, or they don't like their home life, or they've been emotionally abused, so they don't want to be in that environment that is toxic for them, and work is their way out. And so this is just a little piece, and I try to be very careful about sharing the definitives of the DISC results. DISC results, we talk very general. We talk that you may tend or prefer to do these things. You may act this way. You might have a propensity to say this or do this. It's not definitive, like you said, because anything hard and fast like this is, especially with something like this assessment that you're giving people can gamify it, and you can see some of that stuff, but they may be resistant to the assessment. They may not feel safe when taking the assessment. They may feel like you're trying to psychoanalyze them or get into their head or something like that. So we got to be really careful about how we do this and what we use this tool for. A hammer is only good as a hammer. If you start using it for other purposes that it wasn't intended for, then it's no longer a hammer.
Yeah, I'm reminded of something my dad said when I used to bang my finger with a hammer and get mad and throw it down. He'd tell me it's not the tool, it's the user. And so this is just something, I guess, that we can utilize to help us make some basic assumptions. Now, let's say during an interview process, we have the DISC in front of us. How could that be of benefit in questions that we ask, things like that?
Absolutely, and you hit the proverbial nail on the head. It helps you
Quit stealing my thunder there, Chris.
That's right. You really are able to ask more pointed questions or more direct questions. I think a lot of times when we interview people, number one, we have no clue what we're doing. So we ask things like, well, what do you think about this? Or how would you act in this situation? Or what about this? Or what about that? In the DISC assessment, there are things that pop up that say they may tend to act this way. And so now I was told by somebody that they used the assessment. They had done this very thing that we talked about. They looked at the assessment and it said they may tend to jump into a snap judgment or get volatile or something along those lines. And so he took that information and he said, he asked the person a question and it was a little pointed, but he said, what if we asked you to do this? And the individual responded in a very abrupt kind of way and almost got volatile in the interview process. What the hirer took from that was, wow, had I not seen this, I wouldn't have known to ask a question like that to see how they would respond. Because now, if they're volatile or if they react negatively, that can negatively impact my customers. It can negatively impact my team, my company reputation that we built and doing all of this stuff, right? So it's instances like that where people can gain a little bit of insight and ask a question and not be accusatory, but say, hey, how would you respond with this? Or how do you handle something like this? It gives us a little bit more direction instead of just the age old, hey, sell me this pencil kind of responses.
And it really is at the foundational base culture. When you hire, if someone's not going to fit your culture, that's going to be a problem down the road. But you have to have a culture, right? You have to have developed a good culture. And that's part of what leadership training is for. And I know Service Nation is developing some leadership classes around being a better leader, leadership around putting in quality in your organization. And one of the focal points of all of those classes is the culture. So it's sounds to me like the DISC assessment can really help you slot to the culture that you have, but it can't just be about that D, I, S, and C. There's other parts to that assessment you referenced earlier when we were talking. Can you just dig into those briefly about how they're valuable?
Sure. Again, when we understand what the DIS and C are, they are more visible or visual. So you can see them. They're external things that it's how people react. When somebody's sitting in the corner of the room, nursing a drink and being, watching everybody kind of with a skeptical eye, not a creepy eye, but just kind of a skeptical eye, kind of looking and observing the room, you know that person is probably a high S or a high C because of some of the things that they're doing. Now, when you go and you have a conversation with them, you start to learn a little bit more, but that's visual, right? That's somebody that's sitting on the outside watching. When you see somebody that's totally engaging, has nice clothes on, and right, they're dressed to the nines, and they're the talk of the room, you're probably dealing with a high I. And that person that's direct and makes those decisions right away, again, all things that are really visible and external, right? When you start getting into the values piece, there are 7 items that we look to understand a little bit more. And this is, why do you do the things you do? Do you like to lead? Do you not like to lead? Do you want to have balance and harmony in your life? Do you have a high political? In other words, do you like to lead or not lead? Do you like just being on the team? Do you have a high aesthetic where you really care about people and it's all about people, almost to your detriment? Is it about the economic? Not necessarily about the money, but money has something to do with that driver, but you're competitive and you are looking for that return on investment that you're giving. Is it about the rules and following these rules, and it's high regulatory or high theoretical where you just love to learn? And, all of these things come into play when we start to look at the person, because it helps us to understand why they do the things that they do. And then again, the last one is called the attributes, and the attributes really focuses on, how do I see myself versus the world? And then how do I see the world, the people, the solutions, and the strategies, and how do I look at those versus who I am and how it applies to my life? And so we're looking at extrinsic and intrinsic values as well as systemic. So we're trying to understand those 3 pieces of somebody, and we get a glimpse into that when somebody is self-direction is super high. It means that they know exactly where they're going. They know how they're going to get there. They know things are looking wonderful. If they have a low self-direction, we know that there may be some positive there in that they know where they're going. They're just not sure how they're going to get there, or they're not sure where they're going, but they know it's going to work out in the end. And these little things, these are little pickups, if you will, that we can find as we look and dig a little bit deeper into each one of these profiles, these assessments.
Yeah, so it sounds to me with all of that information at your fingertips, it would also be able to give you better insight in how to communicate with the person and in how to match them up team wise, because putting together two people that are high D may not be the best choice, right?
Absolutely. And what we see in the classes that we've done, we talk about how do we hire for, number one, how do we hire for the right position, but then how do we team them up? Because a lot of times we have people that work together in teams. And in the trades, HVAC, plumbing, electrical, right? We work together with another person. If we're both high S's, we're both going to be meticulous about doing things a certain way, but we're not going to want to offend the other person. And so it may take us forever to get things done because nobody wants to make a decision. On the other hand, like you're saying, if we've got two high D people that are working together, they're going to be at each other's throats in about 10 minutes because they're making decisions without the care of the other person, so to speak. And I'm not saying that all of them are like that, but typically when you run across a high D, they're more concerned with the results than they are about the relationship. And so they can come across as edgy or even combative, right, in the way that they do things. So yes, it can help us to understand if I put a D with an S, if I put a D with an I, if I put an I with a C, man, these things are going to work well and they're going to come together and this will help this and this person will do this for this person, right? And the high C will keep the high S or high I in check and say, hey, don't forget about the rules. This is all fun and games and this is great and we're having a good time, but don't forget about the rules. And the high I goes, oh yeah, thanks, that's good. Thanks for the reminder, right? And so the way this all comes together is super important. And that's why when I tell people, this is not something to be taken lightly, but it is a tool that can be used. And if it's used properly, man, this can help you out and make your life a whole lot easier with communication, understanding who to work together, who to pair together to work and all of that stuff. And if I know this as the owner of the company, now I know I've got so many S's and so many C's, and I need to if I want to do a contest, I've got to do it a certain way so that it speaks to a certain person. And so it speaks to not just one, but it speaks to the masses, right? There are some people that are not competitive at all and don't care about money, but they want more time off. Well, let's put them on a team that, some of them are concerned about money, some of them are concerned with time off, but all of them want to be rewarded because they want to be on the team.
Yeah, I think what stood out when we talked about that in class was the example of a high D as a person that's big picture. They're not interested in minutia. So if you're going to go in and communicate a project to a high D, you don't bring in reams of paper and all the detail. You bring in the big picture, and they're going to trust you to do the small detail. And when you said that in class, that definitely set something off in my mind about someone I worked with many years ago that literally would run you out of the office if you took the time to explain things in too great a depth. And that would frustrate me and other employees. But in reality, it was just the tendency of that person. It wasn't a bad thing, but it was something that had I been aware of, I might have approached communication a little differently.
Sure. And this is where this as a sales tool, because I've been in sales for over 30 years, this comes in really handy as a sales tool because now I understand when I'm talking to a high D, I just need to keep it high level. Here's what you need to know. Here's how much it's going to cost. Here's when we can get it done. What do you want to do? A high I, they want to be BFFs. They want you to, hey, man, how's your family? What's going on with this and that? And, I took this vacation and did, right? They want to sit there and chit chat. High S is, it's about you're going to see pictures of their grandkids, right? And they're going to want to talk about that, but they have to know they can trust you before they want to jump into that conversation with you. And they're going to want to serve you. They're the ones who are saying, hey, do you want a glass of water? Do you want a soda? And if you reject that, if you say, no, I'm not thirsty, that will start to shut off that opportunity for sales when you get into that situation with a high S. And so you have to learn how to understand and give details where necessary. High S, high C, you better bring the facts. Now, whether or not you use them is a totally different story, right? And you were talking about bringing a high D information versus a high S. And I have that situation right now. My boss is a high S, high C, and his boss is a high D, high I. And so we talk to them completely differently. To my boss, I go in and I say, here's what I think we ought to do. Here's the research that I've done. Here are the websites that I checked out. And here's what I think we ought to do. What are your thoughts? And it makes it so much easier for him to go, It looks like you've done everything that we need to do. I like that information. Check. Let's go ahead and do this. Or he goes, you know what? I need to do a little bit more checking on what you said. I hear what you said, but I need to do, because of whatever in his past, he goes, you know what? Let me check a little bit deeper. Well, his boss, just bring him the high level stuff. Here's what we need to do. Here's how much it's going to cost. Here's what it's going to, here's the results. What do you want to do?
Now,
And then make a decision.
Yeah, I would have thought that the DISC would be great for the hiring process and obviously the managing process. But when I sat in class, there were several contractors in there who had literally given that assessment to everyone in their family.
Mm-hmm.
And why would they have done that?
Well, one of the pieces of the DISC assessment is there's a page that talks about how to best communicate with you and how things to avoid to clearly communicate with you. And so it gives you an understanding of how to talk to a high S, high C, or a high D, high I, or a high ISC, right? You have to know there are certain things that you want to do when you're communicating with these people. And when you do that, there's a number of folks in our office that it says, make sure that you start with a personal comment. You have to, with certain profiles, and I'm not going to give away the secret, but with certain profiles, you have to go in with, if you will, testing the water, dipping your toe in the water and going, is it cool or is it hot? What's the temperature of the room? And by doing so, you're going in and saying, hey, Jeremy, man, like that shirt, that's a really good color for you. And then we can have a conversation. But if I walk right in to somebody like you and I say, hey, I just need this, and this, you may go, why? What do you want? What's going on? And so we learn how to effectively have those conversations by looking at the profiles and understanding who we're dealing with and what's important to them.
Yeah, when you're in sales, a large portion of sales is psychology.
Mm-hmm.
And so for leaders, that's also a very important part of being a good leader is understanding the people that you're leading. But, I know that you can get DISC assessments all over the place online for free. Mm-hmm. But I also realize they're nowhere near in depth as the one that you've been describing. So for those that are listening to the podcast, how can they have access to that expanded DISC assessment and get trained to interpret it and use it like we've been discussing here today?
Well, first of all, for access, one of the things is if you're part of our membership program at Service Nation and the Alliance membership, you have access to the DISC assessments. If you're not part of that Alliance level, the best way to get access to it and understand it is to come to one of the DISC classes that we do. And we offer it only a couple of times a year, but because not everybody wants to, come to one every other week. But in mid-September, we've got a class. It's on DISC and leadership. And so we're going to talk a little bit about DISC, or a lot about DISC, and how it applies to leadership and hiring and communication. And then we've got a leadership class the next couple of days after that. But that's the best way to get your hands on the assessment and an understanding of the assessment. And in that class, we will teach you, because it's not just myself, it's Carol Longacre and myself, but we will teach you how to accurately understand the assessment and utilize the information to better communicate with yourself, your team, and your family.
That's good information. Now, I know that there are people listening that are going, Alliance what? Or perhaps Service Nation what? Yeah. So let's just do a good infomercial here for a few seconds. Just explain to the listeners, if they're not familiar with Service Nation, what it is.
Sure. Service Nation is a best practices group. We help contractors get better at what they do. We provide them with opportunities, with relationships and rewards and resources that are available to our members. And so if you're a one-person outfit and you're looking to grow your business and learn how to be more profitable and work less, or maybe you want to start hiring people. We have tools that'll help you do that. If you're a 5 or a 10 or a 20 person company and you're looking for that next step, how do I get from where I am to the next place I'm going? We're there for you too. We've got those tools that'll help you do that, whether it's the training or the resources or the relationships. And one of the things that we do better than I think anybody else in this industry is we help you build those relationships that'll help you to go from where you are to where you want to go. And that's really what Service Nation is. We are a best practices group, and we're helping contractors basically have a better life.
That's great. And with that, if a contractor joins at a certain level, they actually can begin to get some money back. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's part of the program that we offer. We have different levels of membership, if you will, for Service Nation. And each one of the levels comes with a certain amount of what we call rewards. And rewards are based on the vendor partner relationships that we have throughout the industry. We have over 130 vendor partners right now, and we're probably going to continue to expand that. But it's a way for you to do business, which you're already doing with some of our vendor partners. You're already working with the HD Supplies or Home Depot or Ferguson or all these different people. You may have the relationship, but we have a relationship with them too that gives you a little bit of money back in order to capitalize on your relationship with us. And so it's just one more way that we help you to get better at what you do.
So if I'm interested in looking more into Service Nation, where can I go for that information?
ServiceNation.com is the best way to find it.
Well, that's simple enough. Hey, Chris, listen, it's been great having you on our show and getting information on DISC and how we can use it in hiring and management. And it still to this day amazes me how much good business tools are out there that contractors just don't take advantage of because they don't know how to get them. And I think that's one of the biggest benefits of Service Nation is that network of other contractors that have been there and done that, and the educational department that brings this high quality training on subjects like DISC and leadership and success strategies and things of that nature to the forefront. So listeners, if you can and you found this podcast beneficial, be sure to check out our other episodes and subscribe as we help build high performance teams and highly profitable and efficient businesses. And we'll look forward to talking to Chris again in the future. Okay, let me just cut that. Well, there you have it, my friends. My discussion with Chris Michel from Service Nation about DISC Profile. This business tool can help you make better hiring decisions, create better and more cohesive teams within your business, and learn how to best communicate with your staff members individually. If you're interested in obtaining more information about DISC profiles, be sure to reach out to Service Nation at servicenation.com. Service Nation members have free access to DISC Profile, so be sure to inquire about the details. I hope this was informative in helping you drive a more profitable, efficient, and easier to run business. After all, that is the purpose of this podcast. If you like this episode, drop me a note or spread the love a little bit and tell others about our show. The Tips for the Trade podcast is sponsored by Service Fusion, an award-winning workflow management software. Service Fusion is designed to make your company easier to manage and help your profits grow. Used today by over 8,000 companies, come see why Service Fusion is making waves in the software industry. Visit us at servicefusion.com. Also, make sure to visit our co-sponsor, Service Nation, and learn more about the premier best practices and training group, leveraging over $1 billion in purchasing power to give you rebates on the things you use most and help you through free training to build a dominating business in your market. You can find out more about Service Nation at servicenation.com. So stay tuned for our next podcast. And remember, tell your friends and encourage them to subscribe. Now go out there and build something great. This is your trade, your business, and your legacy. So make it count. Remember, in the service trades, every small improvement adds up ultimately to big results. So until the next time, keep it growing, keep it efficient, keep it profitable, and keep making your business the best it can be. This is your Tips for the Trades signing off.